Okay, how's that?
Looks good to me.
Okay, then I think I will get started. Hi, everyone. Wow, this is the first time I've done a talk with like everyone is beyond the veil. I'm not even looking at Twitch chat right now because if I run Firefox and PowerPoint on my machine at the same time and Zoom, it explodes. So I am trusting you're there and that everything's going great. 30 seconds in. Um, Hello. Let me talk to you about who I am. I've been making games for about 30 years. I'm making a slightly intimidating looking slide that I worked at three seminal Boston game studios, Impressions, Turbine, and Harmonix. Also worked at Rising Indie Firehose, and I taught game design at Northeastern University. I've done some consulting with studios that have interesting logos. I'm also the game director at a machine learning startup called Hidden Door, and for the key to the purpose of this talk, I am the almost sole proprietor of Foster and Family Games. Um, I've done a lot of stuff. I am still learning, and that's a lot of what this talk is going to be about. So if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to show you the trailer for Loose Nozzles so you can see what this game is about. It is an indie arcade game, and I'll keep my mouth shut for now. So, Loose Nozzles came out actually just about a month ago. It's an indie arcade title that I worked on, inspired by classic arcade games for mobile and tablet, and it's inspired largely by my son Ian. This talk is going to be a bit of a postmortem. I'm going to walk through development and focus on what I learned along the way. I think a lot of these insights will be useful to all of you, and I want to offer some caveats. My situation is worth acknowledging. I managed to make this game in the way I made it because I'm highly privileged by being in a well-paying job with a supportive family, that I have the spare time to devote to this sort of casually as a hobby. Critically, I didn't feel the need to make money with this game, which is great because I totally didn't. This has a huge influence on where my priorities are and how I made use of my time. If you're living under different circumstances, if you're looking at the game where your indie game as your livelihood, then you surely are going to want to make some different decisions than I did. That out of the way, let's talk about how things started. I'll give you the story that I put in the press release for the game, which is good. It got some traffic. I wanted to make a game as an experienced developer to expand my skill set. I started prototyping in Unity, and that inspired my son to produce some art with an implicit game design, which he then told me about. I realized that, oh, wow, now I have an unpaid artist, which is great, but also had a good idea. And now I had a team. And 8 years and nights and weekends later, we had this cool game called Loose Nozzles. Now I want to give you the personal story now. That's all true, everything I said, but there's more context to that. I've been making games for over 20 years, and I'd been at Harmonix for about 7 at that point. I'd had some successes, but I'd sort of hit a wall or a ceiling. Like I tried being a manager, decided I was underexperienced for that, got back into design, had some success. I had multiple chances to lead projects, and despite some successful prototypes, never got one of my own game ideas into production. I was on my way to getting pigeonholed as a utility designer, great at and greatly appreciated for solving problems on various projects, but not leading one of my own. I felt kind of stuck. So how was I going to get out of this? I realized I was I was at a fork in the road, in part because somewhere along the way we had kids, and they took up a lot of time. A lot of really wonderful time, but it also meant things like hobbies, like the music I'd been doing on the side with another Harmonix band member. There wasn't a lot of time for a lot of fun escapades like that. So I had to make a choice. Did I want to actually get good at the guitar so I could keep going after music, which I really enjoyed doing? Or did I want to learn enough programming that I would be able to do my own projects on my own, to be able to do more aspects of games, to become more knowledgeable and more skilled? I had to decide which would be the most worthy of investment and which might help me be either more unstuck at work or more fulfilled as a person. I decided to go, unsurprisingly, with game development. I committed to learning more about making games, not just programming. I wanted to learn how to tackle all the things, in part to broaden my skills, but also, if I'm going to be honest, because I'm a massive introvert. And if I do all the jobs, that's fewer people for me to talk to. Introverting myself into a safe space is probably what made this game possible. It also gave me fewer places to look if something went wrong and I needed to figure out what the cause was. So it's going to be. So I searched for ideas with a core interaction I could envision prototyping with my very limited technical skills at the time in Unity or anywhere else. Had an idea I was informally calling Fort Fighters, which was a first-person shooter. This gimmick would have been that you could sort of build scaffolding under your feet, sort of like casting a magic spell, sort of like the Marvel character Iceman shooting out ramps and slides as he moved through the air. I had another idea, which I still think is really cool, where you're a sound effects guy at an old-time radio show, but you have this problem where your script is disappeared for some reason, and now you have to improvise based on the audio on what the actors are saying to decide what sounds make sense at what time. Both were kind of cool in the moment, but neither really crystallized into a core loop, and honestly, both were pretty scary in terms of scope. I did learn some initial techniques through this and some bad habits in Unity, and if you've learned Unity through tutorials online, you're going to learn some bad habits. Ultimately, nothing really clicked game-wise. Where I really picked up both skills and confidence were doing game jams, specifically the global game jam. Starting them at 40 meant I was a little old for uncomfortable sleepovers in public libraries. But this was a really good fit for me because as an anxious person, which you know me and all you know is true, there are two ways that something like the Global Game Jam fights my natural anxiety. The naivete of starting something new and exciting, and then deadlines to force you to finish them. Both of those are techniques that I can kind of box myself into getting it over my head and then swimming out. The first couple of years, and anyone who's done game jams, it's very likely the first things you do are not going to be great. But then after that, I got a groove going and learned a lot, really enjoyed working with people. And I don't think I could have felt confident to tackle a full game on my own without the skills I learned jamming. So that'll lead to my first takeaway, because I wanted to make sure this was useful to someone other than myself. If you want to get better at making games, make lots of tiny games. Work on small things, keep your ambition really, really focused, and use that opportunity to burn through all of your learning how to do stuff time and learning what makes for a good game. If you can do that, you can then execute on something more substantial with a lot more confidence and skill. So where Loose Nozzles itself started was based on this really cool tutorial from a French studio called Pixel Nest that was explaining how to make a 2D game in Unity. It was really friendly. It had really great presentation. All the assets you needed were baked into the website. It's still up. I highly recommend it if you want to learn how to build something in 2D in Unity. So I built it, and then Ian drew something as an idea for a new game, and I decided to try to slot it in instead. So I took his then age 4-year-old helicopter, learned how to scan it, rip it, turn it into assets, and then made this wonderful prototype, which I can see little shreds and bits of Loose Nozzles inside of it, but you can also see that Unity's 2D physics need to be tamed. And I have a special shout out of thanks to Tim Stelmach, a local designer programmer, who gave me the advice on how to make the physics actually work successfully for the game. Once I built this, Ian then came back to me with another game idea. And this is the pitch that made Loose Nozzles happen. He showed me this drawing, and then he talked through that you are the rocket, and there's this alien he called a cannon shooter. And he described how the cannon shooter would hit the rocket and knock pieces off the rocket. I think he might have even talked about how with the pieces falling off the rocket would fly differently. And he started describing game mechanics to me, which I thought was pretty trippy for a 5-year-old. And the art was really cool and really simple. And I was looking for something to build that was concrete. And this is where I think the two of us worked together for the first time. And it's an adaptation of his idea, and I call it a yes and one, because a lot of it involved improvisation. When I looked at his idea, it made me think of the classic arcade game Lunar Lander, rocket physics being the key or the core component. a challenging game, but a really fun game. And it made me think about how I could do that with this 2-rocket model. He talked about shooting, and I wasn't sure I wanted that to be the core of the game, and I wasn't sure what the core of the game was, but I started thinking about another classic arcade game called Choplifter, where your goal was to rescue people. So I thought, that could be a good mechanic to use with this lunar lander type model, and I don't remember seeing that before, although I think there's some space taxi games that do that. His idea of breaking parts off your rocket and affecting how you fly, that I'm sure like having systems break down like that has been done before, but in this context, it felt really new and fresh and would make it more challenging to fly and make it fun to fly. All of that led to a conception of a game that I wouldn't have thought of on my own, and most importantly, made sure that now I was no longer working on a solo project. This was a team project. This is where Loose Nozzles started. My second takeaway from this I want to give you is that Jesse Schell talks about taking inspiration from anywhere as a designer. And many people talk about the improv mindset of yes and getting you to new ideas. And I do think that if you can take ideas you wouldn't have expected and think really openly about where you could take them, you can get to some new possibilities in your game ideas. This is the very first prototype I had of Loose Nozzles in video. A lot of the core stuff is there. This is actually, the guy who was complaining or saying that games, you make the art first, then you finish the rest of the game, accidentally did that with this game. So I am the exception that proves the rule. I'm gonna move on. Moving from prototype to game, this is where we actually started moving into development proper. The game core was pretty much present. But now we're going to make a game that would last not just more than a minute or 30 seconds. Started with Ian and I thinking about level ideas. He was drawing some cool stuff, and I would build some of it, and I would show some of it to people at Harmonix to see what they thought. He was dreaming up some pretty elaborate levels that are way above my skill to build stuff, and so I actually kind of focused just on interesting spaces to fly through. I actually probably made a misstep at this point in that I decided, well, I didn't decide, I felt I was not skilled enough to build a level editor. And Unity made it easy for someone like me to make levels, but not a 5-year-old or 6-year-old. So past a certain point, I took over level construction, and Ian was not involved in that. And that's because of one principle that I held pretty much all the way through the game, and I think was really important. I never pressured him to do anything that I thought would feel too much like work. I wanted this to be fun for him, so I was going to shoulder most of the burdens. That naturally meant that there are things he wasn't as involved in, and that in some ways means that overall he wasn't as involved in the game as he might have wanted in hindsight, but it kept things more balanced. Now, he was definitely involved in art. He created these assets, and again, thanks to my handy all-in-one printer scanner in the house, I was able to pull them apart in GIMP. Yay, I'm cheap, so I didn't use Photoshop, and made all these 2D assets for use as sprites. But I needed to figure out a way to extend his art into levels without forcing him to draw endless amounts of stuff that had to be malleable and practical. And that's where the idea of torn construction paper came from. It's something that I could control and do, but would coexist with Ian's art and allow us to make things very effectively. So that became, it added texture, literal texture, and I think charm for pretty much no cost. Another place Ian was directly involved was audio. I don't remember exactly where it came up, but the idea of using his mouth sounds, a lot of this was based on not wanting to pay anyone to do anything or learn how to be good at doing other things, like actually doing audio. And so Ian using his mouth sounds to do the rocket sounds and the crash sounds were a big part of what made the game sort of come together. And we just recorded them in the bed underneath covers. This was a dramatic reenactment I did a few years ago. I'm going to play a sound, a raw edit from a raw take from one of our things. And I'll warn you, it gets loud at the end because Ian misinterprets one of my words.
Can you do a few more bing, bing, bings? I could really use those for something else.
Bing, bing, bing.
Higher ones?
Bing, bing, bing.
Not louder, just higher.
What's higher now?
Bing, bing, bing.
Bing, bing, bing.
Anyway, that was a lot of fun, and I really love those memories of us making that stuff together. And those sound effects are still in the game to this day, which actually points to a point I didn't have a slide for, but I'm remembering in the moment. One of the constraints of the game is that as Ian got older, he couldn't replicate the sound or the look of art he did before. So a lot of the reasons the game are constrained to the assets they are is because kid got old. So that's how the shape of the game is informed to some degree. Camera flow. This was the first really complicated new system I came in, and this was one where I was incredibly fortunate that one of the developers of Insanely Twisted Shadow Planet deeply detailed how they built a camera system for that 2D side-scrolling exploration game. I learned a lot from it and it gave me the tools and confidence to build more interesting levels. So a quiet takeaway here is like find experts that have done stuff that are willing to communicate with you. And luckily there are a lot of them in the indie games community. And you can find shortcuts to a lot of things and actually learn ways to approach your game you may never have thought before. There are a bunch of other mechanics that we considered. Power-ups, tractor beams, explosives were all things that either Ian and I had thought about. We had a weird constraint that it needed to all work with the 2-button interface because I didn't want to make it a complex thing. I just wanted to be push the left button, push the right button, and try to make the game fit within that. I'm showing you Ian's ideas because they're much cuter than mine. In the end, I actually focused on a very lean feature set, partially because of that input constraint, but also to keep me focused. Feature creeping a bunch of interesting mechanics into the game weren't going to make me ship good levels and make the most out of the flight mechanics. So I actually pulled back to just the minimum set for this game. Going to talk about one big design choice that we then made after that, which is difficulty. One thing you'll see in this video, and you saw in the earlier one, is that when you hit stuff, all it takes is one hit for your ship to fall apart. And that was hilarious and really fun when people played the game initially. But it made the game almost impossible to learn. And when you have a game that looks childlike, it being appealing to people of all ages was sort of an important goal. And if it was going to be that frustrating, I would never have anyone stick with that game. I mean, kids, adults, a lot of people would just turn off. So we decided that one-hit breakage was something that, while it was appealing in the moment, was going to make the game nearly unlearnable. And we added an incremental damage system. Actually took one-hit damage and made it a bonus mode, and I put it behind a paywall. So that was my one attempt at savvy monetization, and also just keeping what was a cool game dynamic and putting it in the game without it disrupting the rest of the experience. This design approach and all of the technical and artistic ones before this were actually validated when we went to Boston Fig in 2015. We got feedback that actually the game wasn't too hard, or at least when it was challenging, people laughed at how it looked and sounded, and they were much more willing to stick through with the sometimes challenging flight mechanics when they were happy. Ian got to be a playtest proctor, and I had to keep reminding him not to tell people what to do and to be quiet and let them play, as all good playtest administrators do. He wasn't great at that. He was 6. We also got our very first on-screen interview together, which was really fun, from Random Assault, which is not a kid-friendly podcast, we learned afterwards, but it was a really cool interview. Festivals are not perfect playtests if you've ever done them. Like, definitely the game was still a little harder than we realized despite the positive feedback, but this was a fun event for us as a family, and it suggested we actually could have something fun we could offer to people in time. Which leads to my next takeaway. The core of your game is key. We got really lucky with our core mechanics and our game feel. A lot of what we had at this point in 2015 has stuck in place ever since. If the game had washed out here, if it hadn't play tested well, if people had gotten frustrated, I'm not sure what we would have done. We might have done a more dramatic pivot. We might have dropped the idea of publishing it altogether and just kept it internal. So I think I was fortunate, we were fortunate in having the core work, and making sure that you have your core work before you go further is a really important thing for everyone. And then from here, not much happened. And I got to unpack that a little bit, but I'm going to talk about the next 2.5 to 3 years. I'm going to call the wilderness years. We got to be real. This game is not that big, even for someone who is learning tech, even for someone only working nights and weekends and teaching. It could have been pulled off in 2 or 3 years. If I was an experienced programmer, I probably could have banged it out in 1. But it really dragged on. I spent some years barely touching the game, and this was maybe not coincidentally when I was struggling a little at Harmonix, trying to figure out what I should be doing there going forward. It was around this time I also moved to Firehose Games, which was an incredible opportunity for me to regroup, work on some cool new projects in different genres, and to kind of rebuild my confidence. Now, a lot of things did happen in this time. They just happened really slowly. Finding visual techniques that could make a richer visual experience, like parallax or 2.5D, were really powerful opportunities to take Ian's art and do something visually rich without breaking what was cool and childlike about his work. That was something that took a while to find, but has actually paid off, and all those ideas in some form are still in the game to this day. Another thing that happened in this time is I figured out ways to work with Ian on doing more art in the game. And it's one thing where, as I said, I wanted this to not feel like work for Ian. And there's a difference between repetitive work, like make please 15 flames so I can choose the 5 I'm going to use, and iterative work, which is do 15 things and, oh God, none of that is what I can do. Do another 15. Oh, hell, that's not it either. And doing it. That's an iteration is a cost that developers have, but it's not something I wanted to put my son through. So I needed to find a way, particularly focused on how to make the art in our levels, fleshing out them with more richness, would work without being repetitive and frustrating for him. How can I keep it fun? And what I literally did is I made it playful. I made a little cardboard diorama with arts from the game, like the skybox from the game and some torn construction paper. And I said, can you draw little things to slide in this diorama of what the room might be? And I gave him little paper rockets to play with. So it became more like an art class project or a fun toy or game. And he explored a bunch of different ideas in that context, which is a great way to get ideas from him without him feeling frustrated. We're able to talk about them and make some choices. But then I actually needed assets I could get in the game, and that meant breaking things down into sprites. And that was not something I wanted him to feel any pressure to figure out, or for him to suffer my struggles in figuring it out. So what I decided to do worked out really well. I printed out some levels and I had him just draw them with magic marker, just like imagine what you want these to be like in these spaces. And you can see he gave me some detailed drawings on things on how elevators would work. And then I went in and I made my own sprites based on those, just roughed them out just enough to see if I could replicate his work. And then if I proved that I could do what he wanted with this stuff, I would have him draw over my draw over of his drawings. And then when that worked, I would complete those into actual sprites and drop them into the game. It was actually a pretty efficient pipeline, and it allowed him to contribute in a way that just was really fair to him as a kid and got the best of both of our skills. So I think that was a big success in the process. I'm going to talk about one place, and it's already come up, a bit of an anxious person, and one source of anxiety. And anxiety is a lot of what slowed down development for me. One source of anxiety that slowed down this process was starting. I have a strong fear of a blank page. I love iterating on something that exists. I hate starting something that doesn't exist. And unfortunately, when you're working in level design, every single level is a totally new blank page, and how I hate them. So I needed to improve my approach to this somehow, because I had a lot of levels to do for this game to exist at all. I chose a level-based game in part to confront this as a weakness in myself. So I was inspired by Anne Lamott, as I have been in the past, in her talking about shitty first drafts. All good writers start with shitty first drafts. This is how they end up with good second drafts and terrific third drafts. What I needed here was a way to be shitty in level design and do it efficiently, get out of my own way and make the bad things quickly. And I found a solution which I was really happy with. I found a really low-res pixel art app on iOS. I forget its name, but that's the icon. It allowed me to work in a very quick gestural way. I could just bap out on my phone on a single screen a level idea. Kept it constrained to a single screen, really chunky pixels. They were guaranteed to be shitty, but they were expressive and they gave me ideas. This unblocked me to start thinking about levels in general, and it demystified the process so that I could start building ideas in the engine again. I got out of my own way and I found a way to make my shitty first drafts, and that was a really helpful moment in the process. Another way that I got to deal with my own anxiety about finishing this game is preparation. There are a lot of ways to design on large designs are, if you can break them into smaller patterns and smaller tasks, it's easier to get them done and they're less overwhelming. And luckily there are people that have worked on ways to take big design problems and slice them up in this way. Ubisoft has their rational game design concept, and I was lucky enough to actually get some training in that from Alexi Jolie DeSoto, formerly of Ubisoft, when he came to Boston to talk about the process. And he also talked about Naughty Dog's macro flow, which is a way that they basically mapped mechanics across levels. This could easily be overkill for a small indie game with just like 26 levels. But for me, trying to wrap my head around how to break this into small problems, it was a godsend. So I went all in on it. I figured out what my individual mechanics are, what the parameters are, and how I could spread them out across levels. I ended up with a rough plan. I ended up with conceptual Lego bricks I could snap together in ways I never would have thought of. I didn't follow this stuff exactly. It'd be easy to be super militant about it. And if I was working in a large team, I would have to, because this would become a blueprint we all followed. But the only person I'm screwing over if I make changes is myself. So that's a very reasonable ability to be flexible. This really worked for the flow of the game. I actually think that the level ramp up is pretty good. It probably kinks at a couple of points, but it's still pretty consistent and stays interesting from level to level. And I had a solid plan to build on at this point. And then what I needed is a way to push. Another thing I needed to keep myself moving forward was a way to visualize progress and have concrete goals. Another form of structure to give you comfort, a sort of good project management. So I took a very highly advanced management technique, which we've also been using to help our kids learn how to be sort of mature and responsible, which is sticker charts. I actually used sticker charts as part of my production tasks for a while, in part because it was really silly and goofy, and they were literally taped up next to the ones that the kids were using to, I don't know what they were doing, maybe clean up their stuff. I forget. You forget a lot of early childhood stuff as a survival mechanism. But anyway, we all had these sticker charts, and they were really helpful to think in a fun way about getting the work done. It held my anxieties at bay. I actually then naturally moved to Trello as we advanced closer to launch. I still sort of miss the stickers though, and I suspect there's probably a sticker chart plugin for Jira that would do banger business. So I say it was the wilderness years, but a lot of stuff got done. I built a whole world's worth of levels. I developed a whole design methodology and art pipeline for doing it, and it all worked. We actually got to show at PAX East as well. Ian and I were on a panel together, which was a lot of fun. We got to Boston Fig again in 2018. We're nominated for an art award this time. We had a plan to drive the completion of the game, drive to completion, and everything was coming up Millhouse. It ended really well. So I'm going to give you another takeaway. If you feel stuck, there are ways to get yourself moving. Keeping it playful, keeping it simple, finding structures to sort of break the problem down, scaffolding to walk through, anything to keep the pencil moving, keep you developing is important. And I've applied these in other projects. The picture here is from a prototype I did at Firehose. We were thinking about level design. So I pulled out some Lego bricks because, again, level design was stressful to me, but Legos were a lot more fun. And then, not much happened again. We had a couple more wilderness years, which kind of sucked. I had a plan, had levels, had ideas for all the levels, and I still dragged my feet hard. Pushing through it wasn't working. Excel sheets weren't working. Sticker charts weren't working. Chipping away at it wasn't working well enough. I'd spend months not touching the code or task list. And this is where I want to have the one sort of bummer slide in this whole thing. I should admit that I chose to make a game with Ian in part because I knew I was prone to walk away from things. And so I thought, well, if I make something with my family, if I make something with Ian, well, I can't just abandon it. I can't disappoint him. We've got to do it. That was a conscious decision in doing this. But now it's like 7 years later. Ian's, older. So I was disappointing him by not doing stuff. I'm sure I was. Also, I talked to his sister about making another game years ago when she had cool, fun ideas for it, and that wasn't starting anytime soon. And what is it like to be promised something and then wait literally more than half your life to get it done? This leads to my last takeaway, or not my last, my next takeaway. If you are going to mix work life with home life on a project like this, it's definitely a double-edged sword. On the one hand, I did finish, and I do know that if I didn't have I don't have a salary driving this, but having a commitment to my family made it so that I did finish it. On the other hand, I spent years failing to deliver on a promise to someone I love, and that is not something you usually do in game development, depending on your relationships with your studio boss, and it's not one I'd recommend. So at this point, I had this new job at Firehose, and it was treating me well, though even there I was still struggling to pull games past prototypes into production, having a big vision that I could communicate clearly enough for us to move forward with. I had to think about what was going on. I couldn't keep repeating the same patterns over and over again. I really did like making games, and I liked driving games, and I wanted to get better at it. And at some point in discussing how I approached problems like this with my therapist, I realized something, which I can summarize this epiphany as fear makes you stupid. Fear of a blank page, fear of the unknown, just fear. For me specifically, fear of not knowing the answer, of not knowing which way to go. I need to be right, as everyone who's worked with me has known. And a lot of my internal work, has been accepting the fact that, well, it's actually not so much being right as like, I don't want to be embarrassed by being wrong. And if you're a designer, that's a really bad trait to have, because being wrong is 90% of a designer's job. You have to be willing to pursue unknown solutions to problems, and you're going to make choices that are proven wrong. And you do that so you can iterate to the right ones. So that anxiety over being wrong, it really gets in the way of making good choices. Now, for me, I figured out, I'm pretty good at figuring out problems up to a certain level of complexity. And I'd spent years or literally decades finding constrained spaces in a design where I can flourish. Maybe one game mechanic in a game, maybe a sequel in an established franchise. That brings a lot of complexity down. That builds a lot of constraints. But when it comes to developing a big picture on my own to think strategically, that fear of the unknown gets triggered hard, because almost everything is unknown. And I realized for myself, and this is just for myself, the decisions I make when scared were usually hyper-reductive. I was taking the shortest path out of the problem space, just attempting to get to any solution as quickly as possible to stop that uncomfortable feeling of uncertainty. And people that have worked with me have probably witnessed this sort of like an anxious reaction before. Also, when I'm not being pressured by something external, like say a salary or a clear deadline, I also just might not make any choice at all, because that's another way to avoid problems. Now, recognizing this pattern really opened some doors for me. And you're seeing here what happens when I can't find a good non-cliche art for something. I'll just throw all of Google image search on the slide. But this was a liberating idea, not because I was suddenly smarter for having thought of it. I definitely wasn't. But I had a reason to believe that I could make smarter decisions if I could, because I recognized the situation, and I had the potential then to redirect my impulse from seeking a quick escape from scary unknowns. I could learn to sit with the scary unknowns longer and just keep doing the work so that they could become less unknown. It suggested that I could work at being a better designer. And just having that insight and unpacking it in conversations, it gave me more confidence to take on this project, gave me the confidence to take on a game director role at Hidden Door, which I think I'm doing good at. It served me well. It hasn't removed all the anxieties that I have in dealing with situations like this, but it's given me a lot more space to deal with them. That's going to lead to what, to me, I think is maybe the most important takeaway I want to offer to you. I realized that therapy is like QA for your brain. If you find yourself struggling at work, you can look for external causes, and sometimes they're there. It could be a bad place for you. There could be bad actors there. There could be bad situations. But you should also consider being introspective and seeing if there are behaviors that you bring to the table that make things unnecessarily difficult. I personally have been on anti-anxiety medication for 25 years and going to therapy off and on through that time. It can be hard work, and as you can see here, it's clearly ongoing work. But if you can free yourself from patterns that have dogged you your whole life, you can open up new ways of being and relief from pain. And I think, definitely think about your own approach to things. And when you see yourself struggling, take it seriously and you can find help. Okay, we are now in the home stretch. We have a plan. We have techniques. We have some insights that are going to stop us from driving off the same ruts that we've done for a while. This meant that we had all the levels we needed to do. Chucked a bunch of mechanics that were half-baked. I leaned on flight and navigation as the core experience, which are the things I had. I squeezed every bit of variety out of that, for which the rational game design process really helped a lot. I also leaned on a couple of people that were super helpful, former Harmonix design alums here, I think recording a Christmas podcast, and another one, Adam, with me learning how to make burritos at Via Mexico. They were invaluable as design consultants. Brian was super helpful as a coder for a while, and Adam was invaluable for both QA and end game design feedback. It was just the in and I in a lot of ways, but we really needed and appreciated the support. It made the game more real. It was another motivator to keep moving. The design insights were invaluable for both challenging the choices and inspiring confidence in them. It also meant that I kept my Trello lists a lot tidier. So a lot of good things happened, and the game would not have happened, or at least been nearly as good as it was without their help. Another topic towards the end was music composition, or rather, oh crap, I need music. One consequence of the game taking so long is that the colleague who'd been willing to make music for the game got really busy and no longer could. And so in a fortuitous turn of events, I was consulting for a music creator tool startup, Tonestone, for Greg LaPiccolo. And I realized I could actually make the music for myself. And it's not bad. The tool is really cool, and I was able to get some good stuff out of it. And so I ended up doing the one job that I definitely didn't think I was going to do on this project, that I was going to outsource, which is music creation. Anyway, I just want to put in a plug for Tonestone. It's really fun. They're moving forward with that game engine. It's up on Steam. Go check it out. And then one of the last exciting things I want to talk about is Ian as executive producer. He wasn't that deeply involved in design and art towards the end, but he was really good. As I was trying to strip the game down to something to ship, he was really good at holding the line on features that he believed were important, and he could advocate for them really well as a 12-year-old. He insisted that there were leaderboards, and he insisted they were online leaderboards. He wanted an upgrade system. He wanted an even more complicated one when he was younger, but we finally talked to something that would give you a reason to play longer and unlock parts of your ship. The game's better for his influence. I did a lot of it. I did a lot of the work on this, but the game is better for what he's done and for his influence and nudging me to do more and be less scared. It's also exciting because at the very end of the project, he came back into it more. Like, he went out of his way and gave me a ship blueprint. He said, this is what the upgrade screen should look like. So we made that part of it. So yeah, that was a really nice way to sort of land the project with him being involved and being proud of it, of his own work. And then we launched. So going to talk about the launch events and what came out of that. I actually didn't do a lot of press or promotion. I used Games Press to put press releases out there. The first time I did, I didn't get a lot of pickup on it. And then I just realized when I applied to someone else directly and talked up the angle with Ian, that got attention. And so I never not talked about that on the first paragraph of a press release I wrote after that. So I did a couple of press releases around launch. I populated a Twitter account, not thinking that it would get a lot of traffic because I didn't have a lot of people following it or me. And trust me, I retweeted every damn thing I put on that Loose Nozzles account. But I felt like if people came to the game, it was important for there to be something on the internet to reflect it back to them. And the most important thing I had at this point was lowered expectations. Again, wasn't expecting to make money, really thought, I can picture a dozen people getting this among friends and family. And that's the floor of this. And if I went a little above that, I would probably feel okay. Again, remember what I said about caveats? When I said about not being, that your mileage may vary in terms of these business strategies. This is not a business strategy. But how did we do? We got picked up on all the major mobile gaming news sites. The press releases actually worked. Like Droid Gamers, Touch Arcade, Pocket Gamer all talked about it, put it in the new games that week, which I felt was like, I was shocked because I know there's a lot of games coming out any given week, a lot of noise, and we got a little bit of signal, and it paid off in people picking up the game. Even stranger, it went worldwide. Like those press releases get picked up by everyone. At one point, I was looking at my analytics, and I'm like, why are there 50 people from Vietnam playing this game? And I turned out I went to the Vietnamese Google, which is known as Kok, and I found one gaming news site in Vietnam that had published the game. And that was pretty wild. It's really neat to see your stuff sort of pop out there, particularly when you feel that much direct ownership of it. Now, all of this said, and then the best part, we actually got Game of the Week, which I never would have expected. I wasn't even sure I was going to be noticed by a site that we'd even get this, like, anyone's attention at a Touch Arcade level. And we got Game of the Week and a really nice write-up. So we were definitely not profitable. We have about 700 users, which I think for any big game is not much, but actually in mobile, that's probably not the most ridiculous. Those are probably not the most embarrassing numbers you can have for an indie game. And profitability was never the point. Furthermore, other takeaways from what happened. We made money, like about $50 whole. And then there was a bug in Android payments, which meant that we automatically refunded every single Android payment for the first month. That's been fixed since, but that was, I wouldn't even call it a bummer because it was like, what, $20? But yeah, emotionally, it was a little bit of a punch in the face. And speaking of punches in the face, the game is actually really hard. And we made a tutorial, which was another one of those things that I really didn't want to have to do, but I'm really glad I did. But we realized there were certain key skills that I just never figured out a way to teach, like how to hover in place. And I realized I really needed to after watching some people play and seeing the metrics that I'd coded, seeing people drop out like between the tutorial and the first level. So I made changes to that. Ultimately, and I think this is really the thing that I took from it that I was really psyched by, just getting, excitement from people who liked it. And this leads to my last takeaway, which is squishy, but really meaningful to me. When you feel ownership of the thing that made someone happy, it feels good. And if you made any game that you put out and you have anyone playing it and liking it, that's okay. That's good. It feels good. But when you've made a project where you feel like you made almost every single decision in that thing, and the thing they're responding to is something that you owned the creation of, and I share it with Ian, but between the two of us, we know everything in that. When someone likes that, that feels really, really good. So that's what's exciting, I guess, about indie game development. And that was something I learned from this that I'm really excited by. So what else did I learn? I'm now a lot better able to recognize my own fear of uncertainty and manage it, which helps me a lot. I'm now officially, as it says on my business card, programmer of last resort. I can program shit now, which is really great. I can solve problems. I can do prototypes. I learned that. It was a many-year journey, and that's a skill I'll take with me to wherever I go. And I have more trust in my own creative judgment because I have a better sense of understanding what can short circuit it and how to work past it. So what am I doing next? Well, I've gotten a little greedy because we have some people playing the game. And so I want to take some additional swings at press attention or organic growth. I'm going to make a month of weird TikTok videos because TikTok is filled with weird videos and you can actually get them seen by people. So I'm going to try and do a swing there to get some mobile gamers to try the game. I'm going to roll the dice and apply to IGF. I think we have a low chance of doing it, but we have a good story and I'd rather try than not try. And then Alyssa and I are thinking about something to do, but we might not ship it. We might just do it for ourselves because there's a lot of pressure in delivering and it can be really fun. The point is in the making and the having fun. And I think that's the thing I want to focus on going forward when I'm not getting paid. So these are my takeaways. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking out Loose Nozzles. If you do, an extra special thanks to Ian and Alyssa and Kim Foster for making this possible. And that's my talk.
Thanks, Chris. That was great. Very, I don't know, like you're very like self-aware and introspective in a way that I really respect. I really admire your dedication to making this a good experience for Ian. I think that's so cool.
Thank you. It was really important.
So I think we have time for some questions. If folks in the chat have any questions, you can just drop them in there. I think to kick things off, I'm curious what Ian's interest level is in making games now that the project has shipped and he's seen the reaction to it.
That's a great question. So he likes creating. He doesn't like programming, but he likes constructing. He is madly obsessed with Stormworks and Sprocket right now, and he builds incredibly complicated systems, both entirely of his own creation and building with assets from the Steam Workshop. They're both vehicle construction games. One's multifaceted and search and rescue and sort of military hardware, and the other one's just tanks. He also does Trailmakers, but he goes deep into visual programming in those to get things to happen. Warmed my heart that I came back to this machine because he's been doing some mission design in Stormworks, and I wondered my notepad was open and he was editing an XML file or viewing it for some level, and that just warmed the cockles of my heart. But I think he also has a very good Steam Workshop page for all of his Stormworks creations. So he's definitely interested in creating, definitely does not like programming. but he definitely gets something really powerful about him making cool stuff in a game space. So I'm excited to see where that goes over time.
Sorry, are you looking at the chat, or should I just read these out?
I'm going to open it up now. But
All right.
yeah,
Yeah.
shoot me.
Question from Josh Galecki in the chat. How did you deal with disagreements about game direction with your son? For instance, when he wanted to make the game more of a shooter.
So luckily, that was one he didn't have a strong opinion about. I think it was more of a vacuum in the game. I think there were times, and to be honest, I would talk to him about some of it. Sometimes I would stand my ground, and sometimes I was wrong. There was a point where I really over-designed a revised tutorial to try to force people to learn how to do some stuff. And the lessons were too difficult for new people. They were making the problem worse. And he saw that immediately and got kind of angry about it because he's like 14 now, gets angry. And I was kind of like, okay, but I disagree. But so then I did the mature thing, which is like, let's get some data. And I had my wife, his mom, play it and I just watched her play it and I saw the frustrations and it was very clear. It was like, no, he's absolutely right. So I think getting the data was useful there. With the economy system, I was going to do something that was very airtight. Like, in other words, you only got points for a level for earning new stars, for doing new things. And he was like, every time you play, you should get some points. Like, it should be worth it every time you play. You should be able to, he was like, you should be able to grind to get up in the economy. And that really offended my pristine design sensibilities. But we found a compromise, which was like, you get a lot more for doing things the first time, but there's a trickle. And it totally worked. So it really depended on the context. I think I tried to err on the side of, like, when he said online leaderboards, I wasn't totally convinced, but it's like he really wanted it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do it. So sometimes it's just you're a father for a son. And if your son wants something hard enough, you'll put in some extra time to do it. That really makes me sound like a cool dad. I don't know, maybe I just get tired of arguing. I see Centrello's question. That's the first question I have in the chat. Was your daughter ever jealous of Ian's development? No, she was really cool about it. I think she's really looking forward to her opportunity, and it's been a long time. And I think she's definitely interested in different types of stuff. I think she wants to do some 3D modeling for a game, which will mean I have to learn how to do stuff, and I'm really excited to tackle that. But no, she's always been incredibly chill about stuff like this. So no. I'll do RFM's question, and then we can, if there's any earlier that I missed, we can go back to those. Any advice for a current software engineer to make the career switch to game development? Ooh. If you are, I think, do research. Like all the tools are free, all the lessons you need are free, all the ways to learn the basic to sort of transpose your skills into real-time game engines exist out there. I would say do game jams. Like, unless you're really, really old and crusty, and I was getting old and crusty as I was doing them, you should just make a bunch of little games, and game jams force you into that process and give you a bunch of people to learn from, and probably force you into domains that you haven't thought about before if you've been purely a software engineer. So I would use all of that to get started, to build up your confidence, and then you can decide, A, if you actually like it the way you thought you did, and B, if you have either ideas you want to pursue, or you build up a little portfolio of small projects that could probably get you through the door with some indie studios at the very least. Were there other questions earlier in the chat that I don't have visible over here?
No, I think that was it. Although actually, when you answered the question about dealing with disagreements, I was curious if did figuring out strategies for debating design stuff with Ian come in handy for doing more like managerial work or like leadership work in your day job?
Ooh, it's a good question. I think they at least rhymed with each other really well. Like I think in the workplace, you want to be really respectful of other people's ideas and always try to understand, even if the solution isn't right, the problem is almost always worth considering. and finding a way to navigate that space of like, what was that? What are we trying to solve there? What's going on? Let's pick that apart. Let's find the place of common ground of agreeing what the problem is. That was really useful. I think the truth is that kids get under your skin more than coworkers, and so managing that space can actually be a little more fraught sometimes. But yeah, I think actually the skills are very similar, and I think that a similar level of sort of compassion and grace and empathy is super valuable in both contexts.
Yeah, good answer. I think that's it. Unless anyone else has any other questions they want to ask, we can call it there. I'm gonna count to 6 here in my head, and then we're gonna wrap it up. I'm gonna count to 6 while Chris looks awkwardly at the screen in silence.
Yeah, I like the idea that you're not comfortable counting to 6 out loud. You don't want to screw up in the middle.
Those 3s, they're tricky sometimes. All right, I think we're gonna call it there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Huge thank you to Chris for making this presentation and speaking for about an hour here on a Monday night. What else? Go to Boston Unity Group on Wednesday. Come check out the Slack channel, slack.bostongamedev.com. And we'll be doing Lightning Talks next month. And I think that's gonna do it for us. Thanks, everybody, and have a good night.
Thanks, all.